All right. Well, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to stop showing my video, but I think I recognize a lot of the names on here. So a lot of you know me, but if you don't, my name is Scott Namasnik, and um, I am by default the coordinator currently of the new Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance. Um, for my job, I work for the Indiana DNR Division of Nature Preserves Natural Heritage Database or Natural Heritage Data Center as the botanist. And we're happy to have everybody here today, and welcome to the inaugural meeting of the Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance. So let me try to share my screen. Oh, I probably should turn my video off too. All right. Hopefully, if you don't see my screen, you will hear shortly. There's a little bit of a lag, I think. But yeah, we'll get started then. So it was really exciting to see such a positive response to our email about the formation of this group, and that there are so many people all over the state that are so heavily invested in the conservation of our native flora. And so thank you for being here today. Thank you for taking some time out of your day. And we're hoping to wrap up within an hour. And I'll do my best to keep us on track for that. So today I'm going to plan on walking you through how we've gotten to this point in forming a plant conservation alliance for Indiana, as well as talking about a few projects that we've started. And I should say those projects are really just at the very beginning stages that we've gotten started, and what our next steps are in continuing to develop a thriving and a successful plant conservation alliance. I also want to point out that to this point, it's been a small group, as you'll hear shortly, that's gotten us established. But this alliance is really a group of all of you, and we need all of your knowledge to help make us a very successful group. So I hope that you're all interested, and by the end of this presentation, that you have a better understanding of what we want to do, and that you're interested in being a huge part of it. So please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. And you may also want to turn off your camera to allow the video to progress the way that we'd like it to. If you do have questions Dawn mentioned, put those in the chat box, and we'll try to monitor those and ask those at the end of the presentation. And also, again, keep in mind this meeting is being recorded. That will be available at our website, which we'll share in a bit. And it'll be available for you to go back and take a look if there's something that you wanted to refresh yourself about what we talked about today, or for the folks who weren't able to make it today because they're out burning or doing something else more exciting on a nice day like this than sitting in an office and watching a PowerPoint. But this video will be available, so we'll share that webpage as well. So what exactly is a plant conservation alliance? And if this is the first you've heard about a plant conservation alliance, not alone. I very recently learned what a plant conservation alliance was. A plant conservation alliance is a group of organizations from the public and private sector, academia, federal and state government, as well as individuals who work together to protect native plants, and particularly to protect those species that have conservation concern, those at-risk species, endangered, threatened, and extirpated plant species. And they do this through a variety of conservation activities. But the biggest part of it is the working together part, and having all of these organizations well represented in the alliance itself. There are plant conservation alliances at various levels. There's a National Plant Conservation Alliance that's housed at the Bureau of Land Management. That organization looks at much broader level, bigger picture items, and Plant Conservation Alliance as well. In fact, the Indiana Natural Heritage Data Center, where I work, is one of their partners, as is the Indiana Native Plant Society. And soon enough, the Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance will be one of the partners of the National Plant Conservation Alliance as well. On a more local level, a lot of states have plant conservation alliances, and there are some regional plant conservation alliances. And those alliances in the southeastern United States are fairly well established and are a little ahead of us at this point. But we'll do what we can to catch up. Oops. Sorry, I clicked. There we go. Okay, so why do we think we need a plant conservation alliance for Indiana? Up until this point, there have been a lot of different conservation organizations throughout the state, whether they be private organizations or state government organizations, land trusts, consultants. All these organizations are working around the state with rare plants and with restoring or reestablishing native plant communities. But up until this point, it's largely been done independently of one another. These organizations haven't had a way to work together, to share knowledge, to share experiences. And we feel that forming a plant conservation alliance might help folks to work together and to end up with some better products. A lot of these restoration plantings that take place around the state are relatively low diversity. And a lot of times they use the same seed mix, whether you're in the northwestern part of the state or the southwestern part of the state. And so what this is doing over time is homogenizing the landscape with the same mixes being used across the state of Indiana for restoration purposes. We also see that the rare plant conservation efforts that have taken place so far are really focused on just a few species. And as we look at some of these populations of rare species, we're seeing a lot of them becoming extirpated because they don't have management activities taking place or because of stochastic events. And so having a plant conservation alliance, we're hoping will be able to address some of those issues. We're also seeing declines in the quality of our native plant communities statewide, as well as in populations of rare plants statewide. And so we really feel like there's a need for this statewide collaboration where we have individuals who are retired or just people who are interested in conserving rare species working together to help develop a set of standards that we can use for native plantings as well as for rare plant conservation efforts, where we can share our resources and share our knowledge to get better projects and get those on the ground. How we got to this point, in late 2019 or early 2020, shortly after I had started with the Indiana Natural Heritage Data Center, I was contacted by some representatives from the Nature Conservancy telling me about this idea for a plant conservation alliance. And at that time, I had no idea what a plant conservation alliance was. So I had to do some research and see what we were talking about. And after doing some research and talking to the TNC folks, I thought, yeah, this is a good idea. It's something that Indiana is currently lacking. We have a lot of people working separately on these projects. We could get more done if we work together. So in April 2020, we formed an organizational committee to start looking at what we needed to do to form a plant conservation alliance. We had a small group of people. We wanted to keep that group small to start with so that we could develop a mission, set up a framework for the Plant Conservation Alliance, and get a few projects off the ground so that when we opened it to a larger group of partners, we had some sort of framework for us to work under. And our organizational committee that started in April 2020 consisted of a range of organizations, including the state government, land trusts, nonprofits like the Indiana Native Plant Society, as well as academia. Also, as we were starting to form this organizational committee and have some meetings, Conservation Alliance, let's talk to the people who've done it and be able to work off of their experiences. And as I mentioned earlier, the southeastern United States has some pretty well-established plant conservation alliances. So we were able to get in touch with representatives from the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance, as well as the Tennessee Plant Conservation Alliance. And we talked to them, kind of interviewed them about what they had done, some of their challenges that they faced, and some of the projects they're working on currently. And I'm not sure if she made it on the call today or not, but Jennifer Seska from the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance was going to be on our call today to hear how we're doing. She was really interested in our program, our alliance, and wanted to see how it's progressing. And so I just want to thank Jennifer as well as Cooper Breeden from the Tennessee Plant Conservation Alliance. Both of them, as we interviewed them, were extremely helpful. They were very supportive of what we've done. They were very open with how their organizations have formed and their challenges and their successes. And to be quite honest, without having talked to them, we would not be here today talking about the Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance. We would have made it there eventually, but talking to them really got me fired up about doing this and realizing that this is a good thing and that we need to do it. And it gave me some direction. So thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Cooper. Jennifer also got us in touch with David Lincecum, who heads up a group of the coordinators from the Southeastern United States Plants Conservation Alliances. And that group meets every other month, and they talk about their ongoing projects, any challenges that they're facing, any successes that they've had. They invited us into that group as well. So now we're not on our own doing this. We're with a group of other conservation alliances and all working together towards that common goal of Plant Conservation Alliance, or Plant Conservation, sorry. So I mentioned that we worked on developing a mission statement for the Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance. And as we did that, I thought about what we were and what we wanted to be as a plant conservation alliance. So we knew that we were an alliance, or wanted to be an alliance of organizations as well as of individuals. We wanted to work together towards a common goal, with that common goal being primarily the conservation of endangered and threatened plant species. And we also wanted to ensure that any conservation activities that we implement are appropriate. We don't want to just be planting rare plants all over the state for the sake of planting rare plants. We want to preserve the natural heritage of Indiana. We want to put these things in places where they belong. We want to apply best management practices as we do this conservation. So those bullet points together added up to our current mission statement for the Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance, which is collaborating to conserve Indiana's rare plants and their natural habitats. So what exactly do we mean by conserve? Conserve can obviously have a lot of different meanings, and I've tried to capture some of those in the bullet points on this slide. It's possible that I've missed some things that we will do as a Plant Conservation Alliance that aren't on this slide, but I wanted to hit on some of those. These first two, targeted field surveys and monitoring, I think a lot of people don't typically think of those as conservation activities necessarily. People think of on the ground work as conservation, but field surveys, searching for some of these rare plants, as well as monitoring populations of rare plants, are truly conservation as well. If you think about this dwarf burrhead that's shown as a specimen on the right-hand side of this slide, this is a plant that is known from a single population in the state, and it was seen one time in the state, collected by Tom Post. That population dwindled out, and currently we know of no populations of this dwarf burrhead in the state. It's a little tiny plant in the water plantain family that grows in mud flats of coastal plain marshes. And it's really hard for me to believe that it's not out there somewhere. It's a really tiny thing. It's really easily overlooked. How many people are actually out looking for this plant? I've looked for it a couple of times, but I haven't spent that much time looking for it. And I'd have to believe it's out there somewhere. So conducting some targeted field surveys can help towards the conservation of a plant like this. Monitoring, we know that we have some of these rare plant populations, but we don't know how they're doing over time. And so having someone on the ground to watch those populations and see if they're increasing or decreasing, if there are invasive species that are invading those populations or other threats to those populations, that's an important aspect of conservation and something we hope to do as a Plant Conservation Alliance. Land protection, if we have a rare plant that occurs on a property that is not protected, and really the only way to conserve that plant is to protect that property, it's possible that we can work together as an alliance to get that property and therefore that plant protected. Invasive species control and habitat improvement, including native species thinning, is an obvious way that we can conserve our rare plant species. It may be that that's all that's needed for some of these species. It may be that that we see their populations dwindling, but they're not getting enough sun, and that species requires sun. So if we do some habitat improvement by thinning, we might be able to increase that population size and help that rare species. So those are types of things that we want to do as a Plant Conservation Alliance as well, working together to do that sort of work. Propagation and ex situ growing. I know that we have some botanical gardens and some native plant nurseries on the call today. Here's a way that you can get involved in the Plant Conservation Alliance. Having populations of these rare plants growing as collections in botanical gardens can be very beneficial. If we get to a point where we need to reintroduce or augment a population of one of these rare plant species and you have it growing in your botanical garden, you're an obvious source for us to go to be able to get that plant back established in the wild. So we look to potentially do some of that type of work. Seed collection and seed storage, kind of along those same lines. The Indiana DNR has worked a little bit with the Missouri Botanical Garden and their seed banking operation to preserve some of our rare species as seed. That way, if those populations ever dwindle to the point that they need to be augmented, we have a source for seed for those species. We may consider doing more of that as a Plant Conservation Alliance as well. And then these last two, the in situ population augmentation and reintroduction, to me, those are kind of like last ditch efforts. If we have a plant that's dwindled to the point of almost being extirpated, or if we have an extirpated species, we may do some reintroduction or some augmentation of those populations to try to help that species along. So all of these bullet points, all of these are ways that we can conserve our rare species and things that we hope to do as a Plant Conservation Alliance. I mentioned that we had a few projects that we had started. Again, these are all very, very early in their infancy. And these are all things that you can get involved with and that we need you to get involved with as partners so that we can use your expertise and your experiences to help make these projects better. And we'll talk a bit about each of these three projects here for just a couple of seconds. So the Rare Plant Species Prioritization Project. When we look at our list of endangered, threatened, watch list, and extirpated plant species in Indiana, there are over 600 species on that list. There's no way that we can get anything done if we don't prioritize that list to some extent. So we thought we would look first at just the endangered, threatened, and extirpated species. There still are over 400 of those species in Indiana. That's still too many to deal with to really be able to get anything done. So our first cut, or our initial cut, was to only look at the extirpated and endangered species. Even there, we still have 291 endangered and extirpated species in Indiana. Those should be the ones that are at most risk. If you think about what extirpated means, it means we have no extant occurrences in the state of natural populations of those species, at least. Endangered means we have up to 5 occurrences of that species in the state, or we've seen major declines in that species populations. And so it's listed as endangered. So those by nature are going to be our most at-risk species. So we have 291 of those. The organizational committee took a shot at prioritizing that as the next cut by looking at the global conservation status rank, or the G rank, of each of those species, location from Indiana, whether there is vacant as well as appropriate and managed habitat for those species, whether those species are easy to propagate and transplant, and whether there are source populations of that species with genetic diversity. And as an organizational committee, we ranked each of the species based on those criteria. We came up with averages. We also weighted the averages. So we ranked some of those things, like the global conservation rank was ranked higher than say, for example, some of those other criteria. And that at least allowed us to get this second cut, basically, of prioritization. So now we have the 291 species that are endangered or extirpated from Indiana that are prioritized based on those criteria. Now, we know those criteria are not perfect. We know there are shortcomings. We know that there's a little bit of subjectivity involved in some of those rankings, but it's a start. It's something for us to at least start prioritizing these species. And this is where all of you as partners of the Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance come in. What we're going to do at this point as our third cut, essentially, is I'm going to provide via email everyone who's a partner, so all of you who are on this call today, as well as people who weren't able to make it today, with a list of the top 50 of those species of conservation concern based on what we did as an organizational committee to narrow down that list of 291 to 50. I'm going to ask that all of you who feel like you have enough experience and interest in doing this, to rank those top 50 species in the order that you think they would be in the most need of conservation activities, and to do this by the end of March. If you can then send those back to me, I'll compile the results, and then we'll create a short list. I'm not sure how many species will be on that short list yet, but we'll create a short list based on those rankings of those species that need conservation efforts right now. And that'll give us a place to start. It may be 2 or 3 species, it may be 10 species. We'll see where it pans out, but we'll have a list of species then that we consider priorities for conservation efforts right now. And that'll allow us to get started in one way or another with conservation on those specific species. I do also want to point out this is an ongoing process. This ranking or prioritization process is ongoing. This list that we have currently is likely going to change over time as we see other species that need conservation activities that didn't make our top list. We can move those up. And so we will have a committee that works on this sort of thing as an ongoing project as well. The next project that we're going to talk a bit about, Tom Swinford is heading up our seed mixes for solar project. And Tom would like to for a few minutes about that project.
Thanks, Scott. Yes, everybody is aware that solar energy fields are projected to expand, or actually being implemented, double over the next 5 years across the country. And that is definitely mirrored in Indiana. We are already seeing a lot of activity and new solar fields going in. So this seemed like a good opportunity for a real need. It's not regulated that these solar fields plant with natives or otherwise, and it is kind of a rush. So this was a nice role that I felt that this group could help contribute in an applied sense for a real need. But and there's a pretty good opportunity here, sort of a three-way win, in that we're moving away from dirty energy and into renewable energy. There's also a chance to convert agriculture, which is where most of these solar fields are being slated to be being placed, almost exclusively currently in ag. So chance to convert that to native vegetative cover. And then maybe most importantly, we hope can extend a lifeline and a opportunity for invertebrate conservation. So solar, pollinator-friendly solar is sort of the goal in Indiana. And first thing that this group could do is provide experts to help with seed mixes. Of course, regional seed mix is appropriate for different parts of the state rather than a sort of a generic seed mix recommended, but also having development behind it from experts and scientists, and give some confidence that the solar or the energy companies would embrace it and use it willingly. So voluntarily is the big thing. So yeah, it's a little bit challenging for sure under the solar arrays, which they want to pack as many of those into their land as they can. It's really restrictive, and most of the energy companies have stated 12-foot or 12-inch 2-foot restriction on height of plants underneath, and some even less than that. Some of these arrays move with the sun, and pretty sophisticated stuff. But so it's a pretty small list to work with when you're looking at regional plants that will do well, decent performers, and are limited in height. So this is an example of some for Jasper County that Stuart Orr has been working on. And yeah, meeting those requirements leads to a pretty small list, but again, could be of great value. Scott, you got this slide in on me. That's a new one. But in addition, there's also the areas around the arrays, and hoping voluntarily that the energy companies will be interested in doing some more inclusive, some more diverse, some more interesting and structurally interesting plantings. Solar, while maybe an opportunity for insects and pollinators, may be a real challenge for wildlife, especially birds. So hoping to impress upon the energy companies the need for some spaces and different plantings outside of the arrays on the property that they will be having solar fields on. So I think that's it, Scott.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And another project that we are working on currently, the third project, is the Rare Plant Species Profiles project. And Teresa Clark is going to head that up. And so, Teresa, would you like to talk about that project?
Sure, I'd love to. So the third project is what we're calling now the Rare Plant Species Profiles. You might catch some of us slip back into what we had previously been calling them were BMPs, which was short for Best Management Practices. They may be best management practices for some things, but when you think of overall what a BMP is, this really isn't going to be what that is. That's a misnomer in that we had the base of these sheets that we've had came from ones that were created back years ago for the Indiana Natural Areas Registry. And therefore were for people that had rare plants or great natural areas on their properties that we were talking with so that they would protect these areas and protect the plants that were on them. And so if these species sheets were sent to the landowners. So that's why we've got these, it's stuck in our head that the Nature Preserves calls them BMPs. But what's on the sheet really is more than just how to maintain your land. It's really a lot more about the species and how it can be utilized for basically pulling all the best information together in one place to hand out, whether we have it on our website or whether we utilize it for restoration purposes. But it'll be able to talk about the habitat and the actual plant, what it looks like, what it needs, phenology, and any really known information about it. So that's why we're calling them species profile sheets. And how we've started with them is that prioritization worksheet that Scott was talking about. And we started off with the highest priority ones that were in the listing. And so those may change as more people get involved with the prioritization and pulling in the threats to the species, the habitat, and then of course, in really bad cases, the potential for propagation and the limitations. Some things have seeds that need different handling aspects and are quite a bit more that can't be transplanted, different options. So how we're reaching out to the partners with this is helping create these species sheets. We have some of them, but most of them we do not. So their options is that if you have specialty knowledge and or if you want to do a lot of research, you can complete everything for a specific species. We've had people been doing that. Or if you have, if you want to team up with somebody else and split the different sections. If you have the great botanical knowledge across all of these, but not so much habitat knowledge, because we do have sections on what the species looks like. We have downloaded some of the other states that do have sheets for different species. For example, this one up there is from Kentucky, Office of Nature Preserves. So there's a little bits and pieces of what we're looking for that are scattered around the internet. So it doesn't we're not reinventing the wheel. Some of it we can basically aggregate from other places. So that is one of the projects that we are looking for help, and we are looking for volunteers to step up for.
Great. Thank you so much, Teresa, for taking that on. So hopefully now you are all as excited as I am about this Plant Conservation Alliance, and you want to know what you or your organization can do to be an active part of our alliance. The first thing that you can do for everyone who is on this call who received the invite from me, if you don't send me an email saying that you want to be removed from our mailing list and our correspondences, then I'm going to keep you on there as a partner. So you don't have to do anything. But if you're on this call and you receive the invite from somebody else, I may or may not have your contact information. So please email me, and my email address is on this page. And let me know that you or your organization would like to be a partner, and I can get you onto our list so that you receive our correspondences. The next thing that you can do is to join a committee. And you can see here we have a number of committees already. I'm sure this is going to probably increase or change over time. But we really have a lot of areas where we can use your talents and your expertise. And this first committee, the logo committee, is one that probably would be a lot of fun for people to be a part of. We need to have something that shows who we are and what we stand for and what we're trying to do, all in a picture, all in a logo that we can share. And this is a committee that really requires people who have creativity, people who have artistic ability, and people who have graphic ability. And I am none of those. And I am apparently currently leading this committee. So I need people on this committee that have those abilities and that interest. So if you're interested in helping with a logo and being on our logo committee, please contact me about that. We also have a website committee. Our website, which you'll see here shortly, is being hosted by the Indiana Native Plant Society. Ellen Jacart, who is a member of our organizational committee, is also the president of the Indiana Native Plant Society. So she's a logical go-between for the Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance and our website at the Indiana Native Plant Society. So Ellen's going to head up that committee. If you are interested in helping with the website in terms of content ideas, please get in touch with Ellen and let her know you want to be a part of the website committee. This next committee, honestly, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee is probably one of our most important committees right now. I recently was at a webinar where Dr. Carolyn Finney talked about if you have a conservation organization and you're not diverse and you want to become diverse, the way to do that is not to try to assimilate after the fact and add that diversity. The way to do it is to tear everything down and start from scratch and add that diversity at the ground level and then build on that. And we, by chance, we are at the infancy of this alliance. So this is the perfect time to make sure that we have diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance. And Elisa Nyberg has graciously stepped up and has offered to lead that committee. Elisa, do you want to say a couple words about that committee for us?
Sure. Dawn, is my voice coming through okay? Thank you. Well, yeah, so I think the goal of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for this Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance would be that all members have an equal voice in the conversations, no matter what their gender, sexual preference, age, experience, or the color of their skin. And this group is going to be so much stronger if we all feel comfortable and confident that our opinions and our actions are valued. And we'd also, as Scott said, really like to bring a greater diversity of voices to this group.
Great. Thank you, Elisa. Elisa has a challenge on her hands with this one, obviously, but she's up to it. And we hope that many of you will join this committee. So let Elisa know if you'd like to be a part of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Elisa is also going to head up our Growers, Botanical Gardens, and Nurseries Committee. If you don't know Elisa, she works at the nursery at Kankakee Sands at the Nature Conservancy. And so she's the logical person to be heading up that committee. So Elisa, is there anything you'd like to say about the Growers, Botanical Gardens, and Nurseries Committee?
Sure. I think initially our first step would be to bring together those of us that have greenhouse facilities, botanic gardens, or nurseries to begin to discuss how we might work as a group to support this initiative, the resources that we already have, and then recognize the resources that we don't have. And then I think we need to make sure to invite other growers that might also want to be a part of this Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance.
Thanks, Elisa.
Yep.
So yeah, please contact Elisa if you're interested in being on that committee. We also have set up committees for the rare plant species profiles that Teresa talked about. If you're interested in helping on those, and we really hope that you are, because there are a lot of them to be written and a lot of you have expertise in certain species, or you may want to learn about a species, and a good way to learn about a species is to research it. So if you're interested in helping with that, please contact Teresa. The seed mixes for solar project that Tom talked about is another good one, especially for some of the nursery folks out there that might want to be involved with that, or consultants. So please get in touch with Tom if you're interested in being on that seed mixes for solar committee. We're going to have a rare plant reintroduction and augmentation guidelines committee. So a lot of states around the country have rare plant reintroduction and augmentation guidelines that drive how these projects take place. Indiana currently does not have a set of guidelines or best practices for reintroductions and augmentations. And we think that we need something like this. So I'm going to be heading up a committee to kind of research the work that's already been done by other states and apply that to Indiana to create a set of guidelines that we can use when it comes to reintroducing or augmenting populations of rare plants. So if that's something that that you have expertise in or an interest in, please contact me and let me know you'd like to be on that committee as well. The Rare Plant Species Prioritization Project, as I mentioned, we're going to be continually looking at that prioritization of our rare species. And so we'll need a committee to kind of keep an eye on that. If that's something that interests you, let me know and we can put you on that committee. And then our organizational committee. So like I said, we wanted to keep that fairly small, and we're around 12 or so people right now. We may be able to add a couple. There probably will be some turnover over time in terms of people on that organizational committee. If you have an interest in kind of helping to run the Alliance and keep us on track and determine the direction that we go, let me know, and we can get you on that organizational committee, or at least lined up to be on it when an opening arises. Another thing that you can do to be involved is if your organization is interested in being a partner, we ask that you send us your logo, and you can send that directly to me, and I'll get that to the website committee. We'd like to put all of the logos of all of the organizations that are a part of the Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance on our website to showcase who we have involved in this alliance, and to get other organizations interested in being involved as well, just by seeing your logos there. You can also, as I mentioned previously, complete that rare species prioritization. When I send that list of the top 50 out to you later, probably next week, I'll send that out early next week and get that back to me by March 31st. And then we will, hopefully by our next meeting, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, have that list narrowed down to just a few species for conservation activities right now. And then lastly, funding is likely going to be an issue at some point for us. It's never too early to start thinking about funding ideas, ways that we can obtain funding for the Alliance to be able to get some of this conservation work happening on the ground. So always be thinking about ways that we can find ways to fund projects. So our next meeting, we have set up the date of April 16th, 2021. We don't have a yet, but watch for an invite to that next meeting on April 16th. We've talked about potentially trying to meet monthly. We do recognize that a lot of summer when we're outside, so we may reduce or eliminate those growing season meetings and meet more regularly between fall and winter. Going forward. Hopefully we'll have some in-person, maybe once a year in-person meetings, or a couple times a year. We'll figure that out as we go once COVID restrictions are eased up a bit and people are feeling more safe. And then finally, this meeting again was recorded and it's going to be available, and this is our website that we currently have. Again, it's hosted by the Indiana Native Plant Society. And shortly we'll have this meeting up on the website so that you can go back and take a look if there's something you want to review, or you can let other people know about the website if they're interested in the Plant Conservation Alliance and in becoming partners with the Alliance. So with that, I think
You got a couple of questions.
we're ready
Scott.
to open it up for questions. I do want to remind you. Okay, one thing real quick. I want to remind you, if you have not put your name and your organization in the chat, please do that. That's kind of our sign-in sheet that we're using here, and so we know who was at this meeting. So please do that if you haven't yet. But then Dawn, go ahead and let us know what some of those questions are.
Sure. Just kind of a note from Brenda. She made a comment that she recalls reading an article years ago about some of the daisies in Illinois, one particular in northern Illinois and one in northern Ohio. The one in Illinois, she said, became sterile and only reproduced vegetatively due to lack of adequate population size and diversity. And she just saw the danger of that happening. So just kind of making a comment there, and thank you, Brenda, for adding that. Scott, Stephanie Frieschi would like to know, she says, hi, it's glad to see the Alliance forming and thanks for the leadership. She said, could you briefly explain the choice of prioritizing the most rare, so the X and E instead of T and R species?
Sure, yeah. I mean, there with 600 species on our list of species of conservation concern, you got to start somewhere. And we thought that starting with those species that are most at risk was the best way to go about that. Of course, that doesn't mean that we can't prioritize some of those threatened species if we see that they are declining. But by nature, those threatened species should have at least 6 to 10 occurrences, if not more. And we haven't seen a drastic decline in their populations as of yet. Now, that doesn't mean that that's not happening. So if we see that happening, we can definitely bump those up into the priority list. But that was why we chose the endangered and extirpated species to start with.
All right, Scott, that's all that's in the chat box. And I don't see any hands raised.
If it's all right, I'd like to make an announcement, though. This is Paul Rothrock speaking. And that is that we have a plant photographic scavenger hunt. And in the chat box is the news release from our herbariums, so you can read all about it and participate.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul.
And maybe while you're out participating, you can look for some of those rare plants and let us know that they're out there.
Exactly. 2 birds with 1 stone. Yes.
And Scott, so that you are aware, Jennifer did join us today. So.
Yep, I was just flipping through the chat now. So yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And again, thank you for everything you did to get us to this point. We really appreciate it. Any other questions or discussion?
I have a question.
Hey, Scott.
Hi, Darren Scott. So I was just looking quickly when you flashed up the list of various species, many of which I had a hard time even remembering the genus, let alone the species. But are all of these pretty well known in terms of their ability to reproduce in a given site? In other words, their reproductive information. Also, is there a good understanding of what they need to grow in a given site successfully?
Yeah, so I think a lot of that, some of that information is out there. Some of it is probably unknown, but that's actually part of the rare plant species profiles that we're putting together. We want to have those that research done for all of these species before we actually start implementing conservation activities. So we're going to start with those priority species to get the rare plant species profiles put together. Those will talk about the different threats to these species, what they need to grow, if there are specific seed germination requirements, things like that. So I think a lot of that information is out there. It's just a matter of pulling it together into one place that we can then use as a reference.
Yeah, okay, good.
Scott, there's another question in the chat. And Rob asked, do you have an example from your research of other plant conservation alliances where they brought the partners together to protect a plant population or a habitat?
Yeah, I guess I don't have a specific example off the top of my head, but I know that in the Southeast Plant Conservation Alliance coordinators call, there's been talk about different projects that have taken place. And I believe the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance, and Jennifer, if you want to chime in the chat, or if you want to just speak to this, does have some specific examples of that. I know that Tennessee is currently working on some species for this year as well.
So Scott, just so I make sure I got this right, you're looking for examples of specific species where we have done reintroduction to the wild? Did I miss the crux?
Where partners have come together, have worked together, basically, just examples of species where partners have worked together to do some sort of protection, not necessarily reintroduction, but some sort of protection.
Sure. So all the states that touch Georgia and working so solid within the Southeast, we all have projects where we are moving forward with, we call them recovery actions for the species. And each species is at a different stage depending on its situation. First goal being getting material into cultivation so we learn how to grow the plant in case that kind of recovery action is needed. And then simultaneously working on the restoration of those original populations. And then the next layer of stages involves working on safeguarding sites in appropriate natural areas. So yes, we started on with 5 projects. We worked on just 5 species for more than 10 years. Now our list is up to 112, which sounds crazy, but with the number of partners we have now, we're all working on different parts of that in situ, ex situ loop. And so some species have received, I think 42 now, we're 25 years in, 42 have had that experimental reintroduction or introduction. And we've hit every possible line of success. So I think I told Scott one species, dwarf, what God, it's like being on a game show, the species go out of my head. Dwarf lambskill, Calmia caroliniana, we tinkered with outplanting that species for 18 years and it just would not make it a year on its own in the wild. But after 18 years of trying, we finally, different partners trying, and we're all contributing intellectually, we finally got it to stick. Some plants are much more amenable for outplanting, and we had faster success. But I want to say to you all, what a wonderful opening meeting. You very thoughtful committees you are forming and tasks you are forming. You're starting off at just a beautiful trot. And so kudos to y'all for how you've thought through this and the ethics that you're showing and how you regard and partner with each other. So from where I'm sitting, from working with networks, y'all are off to the most beautiful start. And if I can ever help share stories or anything, please call on me, because people helped us start, and we feel it our job to help cheer on other groups that are starting their own conservation networks. So paying it forward feels right to us. I hope that answered your question. But yes, there are many, many wonderful species that have had great success, and we celebrate all those little steps along the way. Can we find it? Is it flowering? Is it reproducing sexually? Is it making viable seed? Do we know how to grow the seeds? Can we get it to live a year in cultivation? Can we get it to live a year in the wild, back in the wild? All those steps we celebrate, on and on. So
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
And I did mean what I said when I said that we wouldn't be here today without having talked to you first. I don't think you definitely encouraged us to move it along and to get to this point. So thank you.
Scott, there's another question in the chat. There's 2, one from Stephanie, and she asks, given that NRCS and the FSA programs create habitat with native plant, what has the committee's thinking been to date about bringing in some partners from those agencies? And She talks about one way this relates to rare plants is the use of species like Silene regia and Dahlia purpurea in these conservation seed mixes. And I know that's a big one for us, seed mixes.
Yeah, I absolutely think that those organizations should be a part of the Alliance as well, to answer the first part of that question. Using rare species like Silene regia in seed mixes regularly, that's something that I think we need to look at as part of these rare plant reintroduction guidelines is should we be doing that? It really messes up. I like I mentioned before, I work for the Natural Heritage Data Center. We try to track the locations of where these plants occurred naturally. And when we have these seed mixes that include these rare plants that are going all over the state, that really kind of mucks things up for us to know where these plants actually occurred. So I have some mixed feelings on that. We don't want to lose those species, but they shouldn't be planted everywhere. I don't know if I answered that question or not, but yeah, if anyone has contacts with those organizations, definitely pass this along to them and see if they would be interested in being part of our alliance.
Thank you for that question, Stephanie. As to go in, Victoria says it's inspiring to hear about the PCA experiences in Georgia, and just thanks to Scott and the committee for getting Indiana started. Thank you for joining all of us too today. Nick asked, the Indiana legislature is about to repeal a law protecting wetlands. Does anyone here think that that presents a threat to any of our rare species?
Yeah, so isolated wetlands are they're defined by regulatory definitions. And just because a wetland appears to be, I don't know how much we want to talk about this, but just because a wetland appears to be isolated on a landscape doesn't mean that it is going to be treated as an isolated wetland by the Corps of Engineers. So it's tough to say, honestly. I mean, there are wetlands like vernal pools that are clearly isolated. And so if there are plant species that occur in vernal pools and nowhere else, then those are definitely threatened directly by that law. But a lot of rare plants that occur, for example, in fens, those fens have direct connections to navigable waters. So they may not be as threatened by that law as they are just by general development and folks applying for permits and getting permits to impact wetlands. So I mean, obviously any kind of destruction of natural habitat is going to affect plants in general and potentially rare plants. And it's a terrible piece of legislature in my opinion, but yeah, we'll see what happens with that. I see Stephanie said she'd reach out to NRCS contacts. I want to add one more thing to, I think it was Rob's question. There have been a couple of projects that have gone on where, for example, Indiana DNR has partnered with Nature Conservancy on reintroducing or augmenting, I should say, augmenting a population of a rare goldenrod down in southern Indiana. So there's been some collaboration there where we had on the ground success due to that collaboration. And also the Indiana DNR has recently worked with a land trust to reintroduce a rare thistle. So there have been some of those projects that have gone on. They just haven't been under the umbrella of a plant conservation alliance to this point, which hopefully they will be going forward.
All right, Scott, you have another question, and you've got about 4 minutes till we reach 3:30. But Nicholas said, building on the Wetland Bill comment, would this alliance have an intent to interact with policy decisions affecting ecology and environment? For instance, advocacy, outreach, so on.
You know, it's something that came up in our committee discussions, our organizational committee discussions, sorry, that the Wetland Bill specifically came up, and we weren't quite at a point where we could say anything about that, but we do see a potential for us to sign on to letters opposing things like that, especially if we can show a direct impact on what we're trying to protect, which is rare plants. Well, it's about 3:30. And I think we've answered all the questions that have come through. Is that true, Dawn?
We have
And
so
feel-
far.
Feel free to send me or anyone else who was mentioned in those committee chair lists questions as you have them, and we'd be happy to answer those. And yeah, hopefully we see all of you joining our committees and helping us. Would be a follow-up email to recap the meeting. So I will. We'll send an email about the next meeting, the April 16th meeting, so that you know when that's going to take place. Keep an eye on that webpage that I can bring that up again if anybody wants to see that one last time. Maybe I can do that. So if you want to write down that web address, oops, sorry, that this meeting will be recorded on that webpage. And then, like I said, we'll let you know about that next meeting on April 16th, when it's going to take place. I don't know of any other messages that'll be sent between now and then besides inviting you to that next meeting. All right, I can't get back to the chat. I saw something else come in. I don't know if it was a question or not, Dawn.
Most of them are all just thank yous.
No.
Nice job.
Okay. All right, well, we might as well wrap up then. I think it's 3:30. So thank you all very much for your time. We're, like I said, we're really excited to have so many people interested and hope we can do great things as an Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody have a great day.
Thanks.